Okay, let's do this. So, welcome everyone once again. I see people hopping on the chat. Hi, Miha from Italy. So, our guest today is James Kessinger. He's an experienced B2B CMO and marketing executive who leadership in both large global enterprise companies all the way down to bootstrap startups. He has a deep understanding of how to energize, optimize, and scale teams while creating operational efficiencies to achieve growth targets for various size business units and companies within particular life cycle stages. So, in his current role, James is the group VP of marketing at SolarWinds, where he's responsible for global demand generation. What does that mean? It means that he's responsible for field marketing, global partner marketing, content marketing, global campaigns, ABM, and digital marketing. And he still finds the time to chat with us a little bit. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and welcome to the stage, James.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Pedro. That was good. I do travel quite a bit these days, but these things are kind of fun. So happy to take. I saw there's a lot of questions, so
yes.
I'm not
So
sure we'll get to them all.
We don't have a lot of B2B growth marketing people sharing their knowledge with the community. So this is a special one, and we blew the roof off in terms of the number of questions. We probably won't have time to go through them all, but we picked at least 15, 20 questions to address during the next 60 minutes. After this AMA, this recording will still be available on the Growth Hackers community. And a few of the extra questions that we haven't had the time to address today will also be answered directly in the community. So stay tuned. After this live session, you guys can go directly to the community and we will upload in the recording. So without further ado, let's start it out with you telling us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, James? What happened over those 25 years of experience that you have?
Yeah, sure. So, I started my career in large enterprise, so like the sort of the large companies. I started in telco, then moved into Cisco, not the food service company, and spent quite a bit of time at Cisco, which was great because it sharpens your skills in different ways, and it sort of allows you, when you sort of stay at a company for a while, especially a large company, you move around the business, so you learn multiple functions. Not just within a marketing company, but all over, even sales as well. So I did a fair bit of enterprise stuff, and then moved into the startup world. The last, I guess, 7 or 8 years, I was in startups prior to SolarWinds. I just started at SolarWinds 3-4 months ago. So it's been a fun ride, and I think honestly, moving from enterprise to startup gives you a different perspective because you've been at scale, so you understand scale. You've been at scale. You know how to go to things. Small companies, they're obviously not at scale, but they're also not burdened with a lot of process. So
yes,
which is a good thing, because sometimes process can kill a small business. So, but I think that's the one thing is you're developing as you go, and you're creating demand versus sort of sometimes capturing or harvesting demand in the enterprise. So I think that's the fun stuff about marketing. You can get very creative on that I guess on the startup side. And you're hands-on. Sometimes in the enterprise, the brand was built long before you got there. It'll be gone. They're long before you're gone, right? So, So that's my career. I think try to sum it up a little bit. So I've definitely touched most, if not all, areas of marketing, from the product to the solution marketing, partner marketing, field marketing, demand gen, creative. I've sort of touched, I guess, pretty much all facets of it at this point. So it's been a fun ride.
Awesome. And just out of curiosity, James, how many people are in your team right now at SolarWinds on the marketing team?
It's 60 to 70, I think, some odd people.
All right. Yeah. So even it is a startup, but it's already a pretty considerable amount of people.
We're late stage. We're in the late stage of this. We're publicly traded, so I can't really say it's the true startup. This SolarWinds has been around for 25 years, so it's a magnificent company. So it's one of the reasons that was the opportunity to kind of take this and really help put the growth levers around this company. So it's fun, and partnering with my CMO Brian Goldfarb's been has been pretty amazing the last few months.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, I see a lot of people hopping in from all around the globe, from France, from Italy, from Brazil. So welcome everyone. I'm gonna go straight to the questions because we have a lot of them. So Simon actually asked, how do we understand and manage the customer journey in B2B?
Yeah, that's a broad question. So I'll tackle that one. This one can be done in a number of ways depending on the size of the company you're in. I think the budgets you have and the tech stack as well, and the complexity of your offering and the buyer, the buying teams, and the size of the companies you target, right? All those factor in. I think if you're a startup, it can be a little more Wild West, right? If you're in early stage you don't have product fit or market fit, you're still kind of in maybe problem fit, and you're trying to determine your ICP. I think that's, you've got to get to an ICP. If you've got digital tools, you should be able to see how long it takes to move you through the stages of buying, and then the opportunity to sort of open the track up and understand, the various stages. I think there's sort of pre-opportunity, right? It's more about the digital signals that you're able to get and understand those. And depending on the tools you use, you can tend to see those, especially these days. There's a lot of tools out there that you can kind of go and see these things. And that's, again, whether you're looking at the digital signals individually or grouping them sort of from an account lens, if you want it that way, right, on those journeys. I think you can use tools, and I'll give 6 Sense a shout out. You can use tools like 6 Sense to understand companies in the stages of buying and targeting them with sort of the digital display strategy and paid social and stuff. And they sort of, they have the common ones we all know, right? Awareness, consideration, decision, purchase. And I think what you're trying to ultimately do is just tighten up what you're saying along the way, right? Because it's an education at the top. You're telling them, here's our position in the market, here's our point of view. And then you're trying to just gradually tell them what the business problems that you guys solve, how you do it, the use cases, and sort of moving them into that journey as you move them into more, either getting them to a demo or getting into a trial or whatever you want to go do, right? I think that's the piece. I think overall, it's, you have to understand, is your content resonating, because your content is driving most of that before the opportunity, obviously after the opportunity as well, but really pre-opportunity. And so it's, understanding how many touches you're seeing, sales, marketing, then you can start to uncover that journey really a bit there. So hopefully that answered that.
Yeah, you did. It makes tons of sense. And also, like, following up on that, Dominic G actually asked, what are the common pitfalls to avoid when you're implementing an ABM strategy, account-based marketing strategy, in a growth stage company? Yeah.
All right. Fire into ABM. Okay, so that's a good one. So I would say first, I think, and this is probably, critical if I would look at it this way. So it's the lack of sales alignment is probably the biggest and most obvious, right? It means finding the 1 to 3 sales reps who want you, marketing, right? They want you and will do the hard work and the follow-up at the suggested times, because you're talking about not demand gen anymore. You're talking about orchestration, right? So there's things that are happening at certain timeline. I mean, ABM is all about orchestration. So it's over a period of time with the activities happening throughout the engagement process. I think second is the targeting. If I really thought through these things, so first being lack of, obviously, alignment. If you don't have it, you're stuck, right? The second one being the account targeting, which is the second biggest thing, and how you choose that target is critical. So these are the questions, you sort of asked during this phase, which is, what are we trying to do? Is it new logo acquisition? Is it sales acceleration, or is it upsell, cross-sell? Because that's obviously that's you got to make decisions right away, right? Then you've got to decide on how you want to target. Typically, you want to go into one vertical or industry, right? You got to pick one area, because basically this is so you can get messaging, your imagery, all your ads and landing pages, all the pain points, scripts, etc. Right? All that has got to be relevant, and you want to make sure this is the piece some startups don't do too good at, which is this is where you get scale, right? So big companies, it's a big company problem too. You want to figure out where you can get the scale for this stuff. So if you can start to get that kind of aligned, that's where you start to move in that direction. And that's also the sort of the first layer of personalization, right? Making the content relevant, making the page relevant. You know me, my business type of stuff. And then I think it's really looking through, making sure you're understanding the size of the company you're going after. Is it a small business? Is it mid-market? Is it an enterprise, or is it a big global enterprise? They all have completely different buying patterns, different needs. So you've got to ferret that out in this targeting section. And then I think the last one on that would be really, use sales is going to have a list. They're always going to give you a list, and that's great. I think the idea is now maybe you take that list and you bump it up against intent data. Bombora does a good job at that, or obviously you could do it through 6sense as well. But I think the idea is you put that up against a list and understand, is there any one of these companies that are in market now on products or topics that you care about, right? And I think that's how you get it. You can sort of whittle it down from maybe somebody who just bought something, or we want to try to go activate somebody markets totally different and it's a heavier lift. So that would be sort of the first two. I think if I went a step further on the third one, it would be defining the success of the motion that you're trying to go do. Again, new logo, acceleration, wallet share gains, whatever, because those performance indicators are different than demand gen. I mean, largely it's a wildly different box, right? So so you have to understand what you're trying to go do there and what you're trying to go achieve. Because in some cases, if it's acceleration, that means there's a deal in pipe, and I've got to go now talk to them and help move that through, versus I have a customer, I need to probably work through my customer success team and increase wallet share. How do we go do that? It's, there's just different mechanics around that. Versus new logo, very hard, because you've got to go, sort of attract and get that, work them through. It's a largely different animal to go run, and the success rate is lower than doing an upsell, cross sell type of thing. And I think last is just get orchestrated. I mean, I said it early on. You've got to get orchestrated. Use technology platforms to get you there. You want to do it right and get repeatability and scalability. So, because personalization matters at that point. So, long-winded.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And something that you said in the beginning actually caught my attention, which is sales alignment and incentives. So I just want to follow up on that real quick.
Yeah.
Like whenever you're trying a new strategy or a new approach, a new campaign, how do you actually connect the dots with the marketing team to make sure that, like with the sales team, with whatever you're doing on the marketing team, to make sure that the feedback loop is actually working properly across different teams? And the reason why I'm asking that is because cross-functional strategies or cross-functional approaches or experiments or tasks involving marketing and sales, it's commonly like one of the hardest is the friction point across a lot of the questions that we ask. So just wondering, how do you actually tackle that at SolarWinds?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback loop is critical. I think there's two things to think about in that. One is there's the human feedback, right? You're seeing it, you're getting it, and ABM is different, right? Just to be so ABM, you've selected your sales teams you're trying to work with, and there is direct feedback because you're monitoring what's going on, versus maybe on the demand gen side. Whereas again, you're probably looking at for your core sellers, and it's just more of a broad strategy on that one, right? I think for me, data. Right. We can all say great things and say not so great things. I think the idea is, as marketers and as sales folks as well, you understand, because you're understanding the data and how it's flowing through, and you're looking at where it's landing within the stages. So there's obviously, how do you go create pipe is one thing, but then how do you take that pipeline that's been created and how do you convert that, right? And that's the seller's job, right? Is how do we go convert that? Our job is then to help them if we see it stuck or things get stuck. How do we go help accelerate pipe or accelerate the conversion of that pipeline? And data can tell you a lot, because finger pointing is great and feedback is great, but at the end of the day, is if you can arm yourself with the data, you can move past the noise and get into I think the true problem. I to use an engineering term, like the root cause, right? You can kind of get into some root cause analysis of why things are not accelerating, or why that pipeline's not growing, or why our lead volumes are down, or our accounts are not engaging with us, that kind of stuff. So I think data has a lot to do with that for me.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I didn't even read that before, but Felipe Rezende actually mentioned on the chat, like sales may be the main friction preventing ABM from truly happening at any company. So
yeah.
I'm glad.
A bad ABM experience can turn off your CRO and can turn off your company, right? So if it's not done effectively, that's why it's great to just do it in a microcosm, right? I think you've got to do it as you want the sellers who work with marketing and who can glean in with you, because you need those advocates to become advocates for you with the rest of the sales team. Because ABM is not for the faint at heart. I mean, you've got to take it, because it's not, it's, it's a great terminology, right? It's spearfishing versus cast netting, right? So, you have to be mindful of what you're trying to go do. And if you have the wrong, sellers, I guess, and the wrong relationships in there and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, where they just aren't following through with, then it's going to be a negative for the business, because that's the business perception of ABM. So, gotta get
Yeah.
that.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. And I think like for this next question, actually you lightly touched on that on the first question when you were talking about the customer journey. But Swat M actually asked how to make the decision making process of your clients faster. How do you take leads from interest in a project in a product to actually purchase of that project?
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, yeah, it is a little bit on the first. I think the idea is it goes back to, you have to understand the journey and know that each customer's journey is different, depending on how
Yeah.
big and complex they are, or how small you are, and what you're offering for them in a value exchange. So, I mean, that's probably the easiest way to answer that question, really.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah. And shifting the gears a little bit to more a macro question here from Kyra K. Can you share your approach to creating a strong value proposition that resonates with both the decision makers and also the end users in a B2B setting? Or should they be different from one another?
So I'll take that question and maybe pop it up one notch. I think if you
Yeah.
take it up a level for the business decision maker, right, it's establishing your point of view. So your position is everything, right? Because from your position, your messaging will flow from that. And I think that, to me, is really what you've got to do. Because if you can get your position right, you can box out competition, you can show you're relevant and more modern, and all that kind of good stuff. And again, it's your unique point of view about the market. So that, for me, is without good positioning, you're likely to become noisy. And I'd start with that. If a buyer walks into your room, it's a good way to look at it. And there's plenty of stuff on these things on the LinkedIn. There's plenty of positioning folks out there, right? I think. But if you're sort of like, you've got to be in your category, everyone's bunched up in the middle and looks the same for the buyer. So, they're going to make a decision. They'll go with the brand name. We're like, okay, that's fine, right? So the idea is, it's in that land of undifferentiated, it's price and feature wars and everything else. I think you've got to define your corner of the room, and here's where we are, and this is the X, $1 million, $1 billion, whatever problem out there, and for the buyers, here's the solutions that go have that specific buyer value, right? And at the same time, there's you've also can paint your competitors in a bit of a box as well. So you can kind of do a bit of both on these things. So you're able to sort of you're not in the center of the room anymore. You're over here. You own this part of the room, and you can define that, and you're redefining maybe the category in of itself. So I would say take it up one and work on the position, because that's probably the most important thing you've got to get right. And if you need help on that, there's a gentleman by the name of Sangram Vajre, and they'll help you go to market partners with those kinds of things. So I encourage you to reach out to those guys too.
Awesome. Yeah. And since we were talking about marketing, if we don't use the word AI here, we are probably gonna get canceled. So let me. So Fernando T actually asked, like, with Google's recent AI snippets and changes in the search results, in your opinion, is it still worth investing in traditional SEO while like for B2B companies? How do you guys are addressing that at SolarWind?
Yeah, I've got a great gentleman on my team who just started. His name is Brandon Hendricks, and he's sort of like my wizard in this world. So he is, and I guess he's working with Google on some of these things as well. But I think the idea is, so the AI, if you think about today, it's about search rankings, and then you've got paid on top of that. And now you're going to have AI snippets on top of that, right? So as in sort of the future extension sounds like, and again, I won't confirm or deny, or I won't say anything that Google's not going to agree with, but I think at some point down the road, there'll probably some paid things inside the snippets as well. But you still, I think, need to lay a good foundation. And will snippets take over differently? They will. Because again, they're getting your answer is getting questioned versus I have something, here's a list of things that you may or may not like, and they send you off somewhere else. Same with the paid side, right? So I think there's a lot to learn there. I think you've got to have a bit of a foundation because the AI, from what I guess the insiders know, is sort of like it's going to start to learn from what you're doing on paid and what you're doing on organic. It's going to
Yeah.
look at that as a grouping and understanding how does it kind of go do that. So probably some inside baseball that nobody is want to confirm anywhere else, but that's what I know. That's sort of the things that are happening. So yeah, I mean, honestly, the AI stuff is evolving heavily.
Yeah.
Google, right, and Bing for that matter too. So I think that one's probably Wild West for a while, and it's going to dramatically evolve into 2025.
I think even for Google, it's still a little bit of a wild west. Even for Google themselves, yeah, still
Yeah,
figuring out how to tackle it. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. So SEO is like just one part of the entire content marketing strategy. So I'm gonna bundle two questions here. One from that just came in from YouTube from Ishini, and another one from Abhishek. So bundling them both together, which is like Abhishek actually asked what is the future of content marketing in your opinion, and Ishini asked like how effective is content marketing in a B2B SaaS world. What do you think about it?
I mean, I'm biased. So, I mean, content is the fuel to the engine for B2B. That's
Yeah.
it. I mean, that is your only education mechanism, right? And that's blogs, that's articles, that's ebooks, that's your case studies, that's your video. It's content, right? And your website is content for that matter. So, I mean, that is, it's critical. It's not consumer, right? So I think that it is the most important thing is to get your content strategy right, because that takes you all over the place. Understanding what topics people care about, your entire buyers. Are you writing stuff directly for the buyers? How is that how are the topics resonating? How is the content resonating? What's getting engaged with, what's not, what accounts do. I mean, understanding that is critical, and having a content strategy is probably paramount, I think, to any of that moving forward.
Yep.
So yeah, I think I'm a passionate person on content marketing, and there's content experience platforms. I mean, my prior company, right, Hushly, that's what that was. I mean, it was a content experience platform. So it was all about, it's not so much I've got stuff living in my DAM or my CMS. It's no, how do I take that content, bring it to life through
Yep.
personalization, make offers of content. So it's if you get the content right, I think the rest of it is part of the strategy around how do you go optimize and tweak that to your
Yeah.
whatever your needs are, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like a personal follow-up question from
Yeah.
me is that like for me, content marketing used to be like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it used to be like all about blogging and optimizing for SEO. And nowadays you got like social and you got videos and reels and TikToks and
Yeah.
etc. and influencers. And I know that consumer focused companies are using like social and video and influencers a lot. But from a B2B perspective, have you guys started to experiment with that as well? Or mostly writing pieces?
Well, I'll give you 2 points. One is I haven't, like TikTok and Instagram, from my audiences I've had, and again, I haven't tried it here at SolarWinds. I'm not sure that I would with TikTok, but again, I haven't seen the use cases. So I'm actually probably more in investigation mode myself on some of those, just to see, because there's always somebody who's got like, oh, that was amazing, it worked, that's great, can you repeat it, right? And can somebody else repeat it as well? Because it's a nuance. What influencers is a bit of the same. It kind of can ebb and flow. We're trying, and we have influencers, I guess you would call them. I mean, in the world of IT, we have very smart people and engineers. Some people call them geeks or nerds or whatever. But I think we have, and they're their own celebrities at some points, right? Because they either have invented something, they do amazing things. So we try to highlight that as more of our influencer, because that's our audience. That's who they're going to gravitate towards, versus I bring Matthew McConaughey in, which is a terrible, not that it's bad to have Matthew McConaughey, but it's not, that's not, you wouldn't be like, wow, he's an amazing IT guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, as a commercial, fine, that's great. I get it. But on the other side of that, I think that to me is sort of the, influencers I think do work. I think it's how you use an influencer. It's not
Yeah.
the YouTube influencer, we're not bringing Mr. Beast on to talk about SolarWinds. That's not going to work, right? So
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Right. So it's still in the B2B space. Kira actually asked like, and I guess you can add a lot to that because you have experience on both startups and enterprise companies, public trade companies. But from your experience, what are some of the most common mistake or pitfalls that you see startups make in the B2B marketing efforts? And is there anything that you would do to avoid them?
yeah, that's a good one. I would say only focusing on Google search was probably the big one I saw again, and some of that's changed now. But and just sort of going heavy. I think if you're just doing search, you're borderline wasting money at the end of the day. I think it's sort of it's a hard pill to swallow, but I think that really is true. I would say for B2B and business perspective, depending on where you are in the world, from a US and largely probably Europe and some of Asia as well, I think LinkedIn's the way to go. I mean, the audience is business. That's the conversations are business out there, and you get smacked around if you're not bringing business out there. I mean, so I think the idea is it's about more of a complete strategy with organic and paid. I think you've got to be able to use both, but you have everything from your C-suites to founders to all those folks are out there, right? So how you go about that, I think boosting organic, right, is a better way to spend your money than just trying to just go buy all the search words in the world, right?
Yep.
I think building those assets for LinkedIn, direct download. If you haven't tried direct downloads, it's an amazing conversion. I mean, and again, coming from somebody who's a content experience platform, software provider, there's something to be said about the simplicity and the ease of use with that. I think we were using it at actually in both companies even now, but I think the idea is you build those assets and you're just reducing the friction. I see it, I understand, I can flick, because you can flick through a little bit on LinkedIn as well, and then you can directly download that. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing. I was seeing high double-digit conversions, and versus sending them to the landing page. So they get there and they click, they want to learn more, and instead of getting a download, they go to your landing page. You see a drop off, right? So from like maybe 20% conversion down to like 5 if you're using the math. So that was kind of the when I look at those things, that's the biggest pitfalls is I think not leaning enough into LinkedIn, leaning too much into Google. And again, your search rankings will matter. So I think getting the blogging, people still should blog, because when depending on where you are in your startup stage, your domain authority is not at all. So you need to go build that authority. And so you need to get content, right? So you got to build up content, you got to build authority, and that will help you go do that as well. So I think those are the kind of the big ones. Don't get, I think the other, ancillary ones are depending on if you're funded, right? Don't just go buy a bunch of tech. I think that's you get into tech bloat and nothing's connected. And I say sometimes, maybe you got a bag of tech instead of a stack, right? So that's how that happens. It's because we got these checks, we got to go get this, we got to get that, and you're not thinking through a strategy of like, what do we really need now to go solve X, Y, and Z? So you've got to be a bit more pragmatic about those. I think another critical one, gosh, I'm coming up with all these things. So I think is partners. And there's two kinds of partners, right? Because so there's your depending on your world you're in, right? There's the resale partners, managed service partners, if you can have that kind of stuff. But the other one to think about is your technology partners. And I used that successfully in the past as well, is depending on, and you may have 3 or 4 startups and you're all sort of kind of in the same boat, right? Maybe a couple boats are higher. And I think the idea is 5, good companies together hosting an event is better than you by yourself, or 5 separate companies. Think about it that way, right? And I think the idea is, that's the high tide lifts the boats. I think, a group of companies can help lift up an event and add a perspective, especially if you guys somewhat work together, or tangentially, like, hey, you can paint the story. Oh, well, after you go and do this, or you get your conversions or do X, Y, and Z, that does that, right? I think the idea is you have the ability, and sometimes some of those brands take off, you get to drag along with it, right? So I think you make your friends and meet the other CMOs or execs, and I think that's part of that strategy as a startup is understanding your technology peers and where other companies work with you a little bit and make those relationships, because it matters. It will, and it will
Yeah,
matter honestly in 3 or 4 years for sure. So
yeah. Couldn't agree more. And I feel like that's the kind of the perfect segue to the next question, it's which came from Claire, which is like, as someone who has led both large and large companies and startups, what are the key differences is scaling marketing efforts on those environments? And how do you adjust strategies to fit the resources and constraints of each of those environments?
yeah, I mean that's a pretty it's a complex question, right? I think the idea is in smaller companies, you're not at scale. So you need to go create demand, and in most cases, be very targeted with your resources and your spend. I mean, you're hiring more generalists to help you achieve, some outcome. You're not doing usually a lot of specialists in that case, right? In larger companies, I sort of said it before, right? The brand was built long before you got there, and likely will be around when you're gone, barring something happening. I think, you become more of a steward of that brand. So your resources are there. So it now comes down to how do you lead them with the talent you have, um, and understand that you're probably going to have a few more specialists that can help you really go dive deep into certain areas, because you have, on a large company, you're going to have more resources, more money to go do things. And you can pull on completely different growth levers than you can in a startup. I mean, usually the levers are still there. You just can't afford the levers in a startup. So, and I think again, in the large companies, while the startups, you're going to create demand in the big ones, unless you're in a new category or you got a brand new product in a new category, you're not creating demand, unless because you might not be known in that category. So that would be the only way you're going to sort of go do that. So I think largely it's more about, your demand harvesting and kind of moving through that stage. So those are just different motions. I think these days everyone's, more focused on net retention revenue, right? So the NRR piece, and how to go increase the wallet share of the customers I have, how to make them happier,
Yep.
how to put more together to go serve my audience that I've got. And I think that's the way to go. And again, getting focused is a big one. I think don't make the mistake, because big budgets are interesting, right? I think, especially in big companies, it's good marketing for big budgets. I think, the high tide scenario of all marketing looks great when the times are good, right? The bigger your budget,
Yes.
it's amazing. I mean, I've been through 4 downturns, and so you absolutely need to evolve your strategies and tactics and measurements, right? And I think you have to constantly be looking at the trends, what you're seeing, what product marketing is seeing versus what you're seeing with customers and existing customers and prospects out there. I mean, anyone can bludgeon the market with a lot of money, and I've seen it
Yep.
done, right? And I didn't usually have the money to go do those things, maybe the exception of a few. But I think the idea is, you got to go earn it. Even a mid-market company's got to go earn it, right? And I think great marketers innovate and they try new tactics, they try new strategies, and they're trying new tech. And I think that's
Yep.
that's just, I don't know, words of wise, I guess, on that one, because that's where I tend to keep my head around that.
Yeah, I love that, and it goes in perfect, like it matches perfectly the growth and experimentation mindset that we talk so much about in the community.
Yeah.
And it was like personally a follow up question on that, which is like, how do you balance it out? Experiments for it, it might be new channels or new approaches or new
Mhm.
tactics on marketing with the ongoing operation that already needs to be done. You already have historical data. It's pretty much like doing what you already know how to do it, and you kind of can forecast the expected results. So how much of your efforts are put on new things versus existing things that just mostly needs to be done already?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's 2 ways to look at that. I mean, and I can tell you, I guess, my scenario now, right? So walking into a company versus building a company from the ground up. I think there's different ways to go do things, right? And there's different levers to pull and all kind of stuff. I think if I look at, the model to me is stuff could be working, but are you first of all, are you best in class, or are you hitting the averages, or are you below average, right? So that's going to tell you kind of, how your tactics are working and how your strategies are kind of playing out. And again, measurements I usually tend to look over long horizons, because you're trying to get directional indicators, right? Am I going in the right direction? Because in some cases you may need, especially if you're coming in, may need to rebaseline everything you're trying to go do. And some of the tactics, as you say, may work, may not. I think the ones that you identify, sure, you're going to go put more dollars into those, or be more effective at how you do that. But I think you've got to experiment with completely different tactics. I mean, AI is a great example of how do you get different scale with it and try new things, but also looking at older things that maybe didn't resonate so much down the road. But how do I get different about what I'm doing? How do I get people talking about me? Well, do I need to do editorial differently, right? So do I need to go to like a Foundry or a Tech Target or something and get different editorial, get people talking about me that's not me, again, bludgeoning the market with what I've got going on. So you've got different things that you have to kind of think about, how the different channels you've got, right? I mean, most people think display is terrible. I do. I think it's still not great. But, if you're doing account targeting, it can be better. But it's not just one channel. It's multiple, right? It's about the orchestration of those things that are happening. So I think the journey's as important on that. And I think that to me is an experimentation of itself, right? Do you try gifting or not gifting, right? Where does that fall in? Do you do content syndication as part of it? So all these things are levers to pull. Maybe it's been done before, maybe it hasn't. You have to kind of look at that lens and say, well, what could we do differently, or what from your past has worked? Or if you're at an event or something and you're listening to somebody, what did they do that was interesting? Like, how did they get so much success out of this crazy thing and I got nothing? Those are all the things. That's what I mean. I don't know. I'd like to go to events because I think it's important to see the tech. I like saying I'm a technologist, so I like to look at technology, but I think it's also to listen to the people there and understand, what's being said as well. It's like this community, right? The Growth Hackers community. I think the idea is there's pockets of people that have experiences that they're having, and it's only shared probably in the community, right? So I think it's understanding how you tease that out and say, oh, I think you go find out who that person is and ask them a couple different questions, right? So, just always be looking, I think is sort of my point on that one. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. So going to Nerissa's question, which is, what is the most important strategy to get right when you're entering a new marketing, when you need to build brand awareness?
I'll answer that with one word. It's positioning. Right. If you don't get your position right, the rest of it doesn't matter. I mean, because everything starts there. So I mean, it's the most critical piece. What is my point of view? What's your position? If you can get that right, the rest of it will start to build itself. Again, that's sort of my.
And by positioning, if we need to zoom out and expand a little bit on positioning, would you say that it's like in terms of the messaging that you're sending to the market, the pricing, whatever you're talking about?
Messaging is different, right? It's back to I think the earlier discussion, right? You're in a room, everybody's bunched up in the middle. Your position, your point of view, right, is different. You're over here. The market this is the X billion-dollar problem that we've got out here. We're solving it. You didn't know you had that problem, but you do, right? You're describing something that's putting a little fear and uncertainty and doubt into their heads. At the end of the day, you're defining your market and why you're unique at it, right? Even though you're in the same market as all these other people, right? Because you're different. And so otherwise, if you can't be different, you're in trouble, right? Because it's a feature price war and your brand war, and you're new, so you've got no brand. So you've got to get your position right. And if you haven't, gosh, I'm trying to think. There's a gentleman. There's like a positioning agency, and I'm going to probably screw his name up, but I think it's Firebrick. They're amazing, right, at what they do. And I haven't never afforded them yet, but they're great at what they do. I've talked to the founder a bunch of times, but I think that's that to me is the epitome. I mean, he's got great workshops he does and stuff, and I've seen. I'm like, man, I would love to be part of this. So, but that kind of stuff is if you can get that right. I mean, you can take your business from dribbling along to be like you catch fire. I mean, there's like and he's got some great stories on that. So I won't belabor, but that's I mean, positioning is the most critical thing, because then your messaging can match from there and everything else.
Awesome. Yeah. And we will drop the link for his content on the AMA notes afterwards, so everyone can follow up, and maybe we can bring him in as well. So
he's amazing. Yeah, he's a good speaker. So I think you guys, this crowd would probably enjoy him, and he's a funny guy. So
awesome. Yeah. All right. So one from Vivian. A lot of B2B companies primarily do business with large enterprises, but but they often find it challenging to expand their market to SMEs. So do you have any experience or advice on how to overcome this?
Man, I've got a lot in here because I've hit them all. I've done a bit of both on this one, really. I've marketed to the SMB, think prosumer now, like the 2-person company to those, 10 to the 100 employees, right? 100 to 250, the mid-market stuff. So I think the toughest are really the truly small business, because it's the owner, founder making a decision. I mean, they're basically it. Everything, and one of the things that always stuck with me, this is from my Cisco days. I was small business marketing. So there was when people still did focus groups. People don't really do that now, but again, it was a thing back then. But at the end of the day, was one of the comments coming out of that was, every dollar I give you is a dollar I don't take home, right? So as a small business, it's a wildly different scenario than sort of, those of us with like, you're okay, I have a corporate credit card and we're doing this and that. It's like, no, these people are actually, that like margin for them is what they take home. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's just a different animal, you know what I mean? And I think that's what you're trying to get through on that one. I think the about 150 employees or so, the founder starts not to become the IT person, and they hire one of the IT folks, right? So I think you're basically marketing to pain points, right? The cost conscious at that level. Every dollar, I give you is something I'll bring home, right? I think Cisco did pretty well here. Again, I'll go back to 2000. I think I have my resume on mine, but I think 2004, 2005, I think. And essentially we were an enterprise company. It was largely an enterprise company. That was all they knew. So and small doesn't mean stupid, I think was also another comment that came out of that, right? Which was like, hey, don't treat us like idiots, right? We're grown adults who run a business. So it's not, a dumbed down version of your enterprise. It's like, no, build something for us. So we did that, which is crazy. And it was, Cisco was doing a lot of money then, and it still does now. But I think we were doing, I want to say, maybe $1 billion by mistake. I liken it to sort of, you're in the grocery store with the lights off, like the cash register's going. We're not really sure what people are buying, right? We don't know what aisle they're in. I don't even know what's on the shelf. So, it was interesting. But essentially, we actually built a team, had an engineering unit, had a small business marketing team, the whole channel, big channel led marketing, and from there took it to like six or so billion, which is amazing. And then because it did so successful, they actually shut it down. Because you know what? It's not big enough. It was not big enough. $6 billion, who cares, right? You're doing rounding error. So it was crazy. I mean, anyway, so that was like pre-Linksys acquisition, all that stuff. But it's, yeah, it was funny days. But at the other say, I think starting in the smaller mid-market and then moving to the enterprise is really hard. Because and look, and as a startup, and again, there's people that have these different pain points on these things. If you're starting in small business or you're in mid-market, the lower end of the mid-market, right, and trying to go up into the enterprise, I think you've got to rethink it, because everything changes. Your entire cost model will totally change. Your enterprise, you need enterprise reps. They're more expensive. Your deal velocity is slower. I mean, maybe you're doing transactional velocity and you're like, hey, we can close in like, 3 months, 5 months. No, you're 9 to 12 on the enterprise. And then you're also looking at the deal complexity. The complexity is higher. The discounts are deeper because they're gonna rake you over the coals. And if you're not ready for enterprise, meaning your product, you'll spend a lot, an inordinate, I won't say large, an inordinate amount of time getting it ready, right? And that's a resource cost, probably a budget cost too, right? So you're talking about getting it ready, plus your channel may need to change. So you've got to think about your incentives for the channel. So it's back to a go-to-market decision. If you're going to move up, it's a complete go-to-market decision that sales, engineering, marketing, finance, if the support structure, all that stuff's got to change. Coming down market, a little different. I think if you're in the mid-market and you started up an enterprise and you're trying to move down, it's understanding, more of the partner strategy, because what you want to try to do is leverage partners more as you get lower. Because again, they are your force multiplier, right? At the end of the day, is you want your reps focus on big deals, complex stuff. Same with your SEs, right? They're expensive, so you want to move down to basically a different cost model. And I think for there, it's it's understanding what functionality is important to those buyers, as they may not need the bells and whistles, the lights, the horns, all the other stuff that the enterprise needs, right? And I think that's the big one, is you've got to right size the package. And so I guess similar to what we kind of did at the, on the Cisco side, right? Is we went from enterprise to true SMB, which is a wildly different approach. But I think even for mid-market, they don't need everything, right? So how do you build something for that costs right? Because you need to cost it a little differently, but maybe misses some of the bigger stuff. And if you want them to move, then fine, they can pay up for it. But I think it's a different strategy. But the tactics change, but not as drastic as going from SMB to up. So that answered that. I think it was Kira's question. Vivian's question.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm gonna pick one from Mass, which is at what stage, and ABM has been all over the place on the questions here.
Yeah.
So Mass actually asked, at what stage of growth or maturity should a startup company begin to think about adopting a comprehensive ABM strategy? Is there like a time, any specific point in time that it makes sense or it doesn't make sense for everyone?
I think, 100% there's a time. It's called day one.
So,
because look, there's different ways to look at this. If you're in a small company, right? I think that you have to look at it that way. Because day one for that means you think about the problem, right? And you need to, you're trying to make decisions on different things. And I think you're still trying to figure out who your buyers are, maybe your ICPs all over the place, right? This will give you a chance to really kind of hone in on what are the core things we care about, who do we want to target, get very specific about what you're talking about to that audience. Back to the scale, you're building your content towards that as well. Because if you're thinking about a vertical strategy versus sort of a broad brushstroke strategy, you could take it and take the vertical out. It gets you a little less relevant sometimes, but maybe the idea is, you're trying to hone it in a little bit. I would say, it's not an either or. And I don't have a demand gen strategy and I don't have an ABM strategy. I think you've got to have both, and you've got to have both kind of starting day one, because the idea is this will get you a little smarter and it'll help you get, I think, the necessary wins you've got to go get and help you target a little better and understand. I learned this, probably a little later than I should on some things. Because in startups, you're sometimes a one-person band, right? You're blowing the horns and banging, you're the drummer, right? So, you have to be able to figure out if you can scale that yourself, I think. But if you've got a small team around you, that's the way to look at it. Because your demand gen strategy is largely, you can get it going. It's going to involve a lot of content stuff, a lot of LinkedIn activities. But now you can get very focused, say, take part of what you're seeing in your demand gen, and as they're moving people through the bottom, I can now start to take a bit more of a focused approach. And I'm targeting some of these like accounts, and not all accounts, right? But maybe just some of these folks and guiding them through, depending on the complexity of whatever your offer is. But that's how I would kind of take that. I think that's something to just do up front.
Awesome, man. Couldn't agree more. And I got one from Bill, which is quite interesting. So it seems like your team ran some AI versus human tests on LinkedIn ads. So could you tell us a little bit more about the experience? I know the audience love experiments and tests. So, and AI is also on the hype. So yeah, I would love to hear.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I was doing, and it was last year, early last year, late last year. Forget what it was. And I just did a readout to Forrester. So I was at some Forrester roundtable event or something like that. So it was, hey, what did you, I had some AI stuff. So I was like, oh, I can talk about these things, right? But it was crazy because, and I was doing AI so I was doing LinkedIn AI for AI ads, right? And so, and I was doing email, right? So it was email ones, which was different than I was doing, but the LinkedIn one was the most interesting, I guess, to make it easy. Yeah. So the idea, and I'll set it up this way, right? So the idea was, it's you have your creative and you keep your creative constant, right? So this wasn't, I wanted to keep my variables, tightened up. So the idea was, let's change copy and let's understand what's working, what's not, but let's do humans versus AI and see if we can get a human versus AI difference here. So, and I'm not the best at writing everything. So I was like, you know what? Let's see what sales says. So it's like, our CRO and, we had, everybody's writing their best stuff, right? It's like, let's put it all, let's test it. Let's just see what's going on, right? So we had the same creative different copy, put that out in the market. Same time, took all that great creative that everyone's like blood, sweat, and tears on, popped it through into ChatGPT. By the way, I should disclaimer it. The paid version of ChatGPT, not the public. You don't want to do that. So if you're doing,
Yes,
if
yes.
your startup, encourage, bludgeon your founder to be like, no, we should actually have the paid version of this. And if you need to know why, then go read up on that for sure. But anyway, so the idea was, so we got, and there's a little prompting going on because you got to prompt it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But the idea was we tested the same stuff in the ChatGPT version of these things, and I cried. I mean, it was like, it was like light years difference. I mean, it wasn't like I'm getting 5% and it's getting like 5.5, maybe 6. It's like, I could still claim I win a little bit, right? It was 21% conversion. I mean, like ridiculous.
It's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it's too high to like ignore, right? Now, the why is what I cared about. I was like, now why is this, right? And I'm leading up to it, but I knew right away. It was like, it was something I probably would have not ever done. It used emojis. It was using emojis. So it was, and not just emojis, but also bullets with emojis. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was like, I don't know how this is working. I mean, I'm like, how is this possible? And we ran it for like over a quarter. I mean, so
yeah.
And the results were not like delayed. I mean, it was immediate. So I mean, it was like, geez. I mean, so I suck, obviously, and that's writing it better. And it's, by the way, using emojis. So so that was heartbreaking for me. But ultimately, it was a great test. And the other test, which I didn't get good empirical data on because we were still feeding it, which was the email piece. Emails were, we look at, because you can write sequences for you, right? So we took entire sequences, and I had like 7 sequences with 5 to 8 emails in a sequence, depending on which one. Okay. And so I was like, let's just feed it one of these and see what's, and see what we get back. And the idea was to continue to feed that, and then feed it the results. Because what it was doing, it would take, if you guys have used GPT, right? The idea is you keep your conversation live. So don't delete the conversation unless you really don't want it. And keep that, and then you feed that into like, hey, and whatever time frame I was using. Well, I had to go through a sequence, and I forget on some of these, that's why these tests were running on a long cycle. And we put the results in, the opens, the click-throughs, and all that, and help us modify. So it's a lot of prompting, right? And so it would come up with yet another sequence based on the prompt, like which ones were opening better, all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of work. But that was ultimately another one that I didn't get to see, but it would progressively get better, I guess is the way to look at that. So yes, AI versus human, they were still winning. I mean, because clearly human written, these were human written emails. So I mean,
yeah, and they have been trained on things that we wrote. So at the end of the day, we still have some guy like.
Look, it's crazy. I think even AI. Look, even on the software side, I think my prior company, it's like we have AI in there as well. And I think when personalization really truly gets at scale, I mean, you're well past the human ability to process, right? So you can't offer, like, you can't go with the permutations that can. I think it was the Forrester CEO. Said not last year, the year before last, or whatever it was. I think the websites will go away in 5 years. And that was his prediction, right? Or I guess Forrester's prediction. But it's like the prompt engine will be there, and is it going to be smart enough to take that? I already know who you are, so I'm already starting to build in the background. Because I'm getting so much data signals from you already. You live in this part of the world because your IP address, all that kind of stuff, right? And then you ask a question, it literally could build a landing page for you. Imagery included, right? I think the idea is that's probably where this market goes in terms of really being dynamic. That's probably why it's a little scary for Google, right? Because at some point you could ask a question, you could go to anybody's corporate website, ask it a question, and instead of being cached pages that are getting SEO, they're dynamic pages answering questions for you based on support data, based on whatever. Right? I'm a new customer. Does this work for me? Or I'm a customer of yours, and I'm having this trouble. Well, boom, here you go. Here's a great journey for you to go down. So I think there's a wild evolution on AI that's probably untapped and coming at us like a truck.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I believe it will enable us to do a lot more
Yeah.
and faster. So we can look at that as a competition, but also as like a huge army of workers working for us at the same time. So
It will. I mean, it's going to be, the force multiplier on what you can do will be fascinating to see, I think. And also what gets to the other side of that, right? Which now you have so much spam out there and AI
yep, yeah,
botting everything. And, I mean, bots are answering messages now, right? So it's like, wait, who's the SDR talking to? Is it a bot or is the SDR a bot, right? I mean, it's like bots talking to bots. I mean, that's a crazy one, right? I think I got a sale. No, actually, that's the bot. We haven't gotten the real person yet. So I think that's we're in that world right now, and I think there's some
yeah,
crazy. So there's definitely going to be some. It'll way over tilts, and AI is going to be everything, and at some point it'll rubber band back. But I think right now it's sort of any idea is not a bad idea, which is, I mean, it's sort of like the dawn of the internet, right? It's crazy.
yeah. So got what like picking one from the audience
Yeah.
before we wrap things up. So we're in the last 3 minutes of our chat today. How do you pick marketing channels and targeting effectively and refine it? So I know it's a little bit broad,
Yeah.
the question from Iran, but
Yeah.
how would you go about that?
Well, I mean, it's for me, it's on experience, right, and looking at what channels are working. So right now, believe it or not, I was just on a call with Brandon, the other guy I was talking about earlier. We're going to test some new channels out, and they're ones that I haven't tried. And again, it's sort of it's again the inside baseball, right? Sort of like a Google piece, right? So how many properties underneath Google can I test and that kind of stuff. So we're going to test some interesting ones there. We're going to look at a couple other areas. I think for me, it's understanding, are there watering holes and places that my audience is, and is there a place to get in there? I mean, people, podcasts were a big thing, right? And largely, I guess they still could be. I think the idea is they're great mechanisms for doing certain things. So, until you've gotten through and gone through your proof points of, okay, this channel is not effective for us. Like Facebook for me was not effective, and that's fine. I get it. And that was my last company. I've been told it doesn't work here. I haven't tested it. I don't know that I don't know. So I think, Instagram, right? So there are certain channels that just, they're not built, they're not built for that.
Yep.
So I think you've got to put, you've got to be able to pass the red face test a lot of times, especially if you're spending a budget on these things. It's fine to do a test, but do a controlled test, right? And then figure out, okay, well, was the test wrong, or was the audience wrong, or was, did I choose wrong? Was it the wrong asset? All those things you got to go to. So I mean, it's not like you do a one and done. I think it's an evolving test. You got to do it, and you give it some time to run. I mean, I'm usually, I'm not a 30-day person. I'm kind of like a 90, right? And if it takes a really long time, depending on where you are, if it's like way up in the funnel, then maybe you get a little longer. But I think the idea is, choosing your channel is important, but choosing how you go about activating that channel is probably equally as important.
Yeah, I love that. And also makes the leap like from like the a LinkedIn AI test that you did to like let's isolate the variables
Yeah.
with
Well,
the
right.
human. Yeah, yeah. So,
Because then you don't know. Like, well, actually, I was doing well. The AI had a great creative. Well, no, actually, I had the same creative. So, and because that's the next test, right? Because now I'm at 2021, right? So the next test on that would
yeah,
be, now I've got a great thing that's going. Let's go now swap out creative and see if that's sort of the next thing. Again, AI creative is tougher, I think, on AI. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe with Adobe's firefighting, it's not so crazy.
yeah,
Not like on some like Mid-Journey, some of these guys are like prompting. I mean, that's it's pretty nuanced out there.
yeah.
But
If you try to edit letters and words on an AI created
it
image,
doesn't do
you're gonna.
well. Right. Yeah.
So
Here you go.
James, so we're over past our time already. I just
Oh,
want to say
guys,
thank
hopefully
you so
I know we
much.
get a lot of
Yeah,
questions. So I apologize, guys.
time flew by. We still had like over 50 questions to go through. We are not gonna have the time to go through them live, but James, take a little bit of time to answer that on the community. So we appreciate you giving us the time, sharing the knowledge. It has been a pleasure to have you aboard. Any
Yeah.
last words that you want to leave with the audience, and if they want to reach out to you or connect with
Yeah,
you?
I mean, connect on LinkedIn. It's James B. Kessinger, so you can find me. So
Yeah,
it's pretty available out there. So definitely.
we'll
But
leave
yeah,
the
I think
links.
that's it. And Pedro and I are connected, so just in case someone's trying to check us, we know each
Yeah,
other.
right. Yeah, I will. We will leave the links and no on the on the recording notes,
Great.
which will be on the community. One last note is that next week we will have another AMA session. This time around with Sandy Ganesh. She's the user product growth manager at Tinder and at Amazon. So we are gonna go from B2B to the other side of the duo, which is the
And Tinder.
B2C. And let's see how that thing plays out. Thanks again, James. I had so
You bet.
much fun. Yeah,
See you guys.
cheers.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.